Okay, welcome to another broadcast of the North Carolina Masonic Research Society. Tonight we are thrilled to have Brother Paul Rana. Paul is a member of Austin Lodge number 12 in Austin, Texas. He's been a brother there since 2007, and he's also a member of the Austin Valley of the Scottish Rite Southern Jurisdiction. And he's also a member of other initiatic orders, including the Ordre Martiniste Souvrains, he's actually the Grand Master of that order. And so we've invited Paul tonight to speak about Martinism and the history of Martinism, how it is today, the modern Martinism. And this is going to be a fascinating presentation. So just to remind everyone that, Masonry is a Western Esoteric Tradition, but there are many others out there as well. And I think it's important that we keep an open mind. We look into these different orders because each one has a different way of taking us to that same destination or down that path. So, Paul, with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, brother.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Matt, and thank you all for inviting me back to Refracted Light and my first time with North Carolina Masonic Research Society. Really appreciate the invite and look forward to sharing with you a bit of my experience and opinions about the Martinist tradition. So before we start, this talk will probably, usually I have pretty scripted, formal talks. I decided this one to go a little more freeform so we can be just a little more from the heart. I plan on going at least an hour, maybe 90 minutes, and then we'll have some time for questions and answers afterwards, okay? Now, even in 90 minutes, there's no way that we could go through the entire vast 200 years of Martinism. So check out the OMS YouTube sometime, youtube.com/C Ordre Martiniste Souvrains. We've got about 50 hours of webinars on there, ranging from all sorts of esotericism, Martinism, Kabbalah, Gnosticism, et cetera, et cetera. Now, before we start, let's open with a prayer, all right? Before we enter upon any great and laudable undertaking, we should always invoke the aid of deity. So assume an attitude of prayer. This prayer comes from, this is a Rosicrucian prayer, and I think it sets the stage for what we're going to talk about tonight. O Lord, from thine hand cometh all good, all grace, all blessing. The characters of nature hast thou traced with thy fingers, but none can read them unless he hath been taught in thy school. O Lord our God, who shall not extol thee? O Lord of the universe, who shall not praise thee? O Lord, who shall not know thee? All is from thee, all is of thee, into thee must all again re-enter. Thou art Lord alone, and there is none beside thee. O Lord of the universe, whose dwelling is heaven without, whose temple is the heart within. O God, the vast and the mighty one, thou art in all things, and all things art in thee. O thou self of nothing. For what else can I call thee? In myself, I am nothing but self. In thee, I am the self of nothing. Live thou in me, and bring me to that self which is in thee. Amen. Now, to start this talk off, the OMS has been quite busy lately. We just founded a new temple in DC last week, and we're about to have an international gathering next month, which means that people are submitting their papers to advance. And one of our members, the last line of one of her papers, described her ideas of what the purpose of Martinism is. And I think that it summarizes much better than any intellectuality could. She said, quote, "This act of devotion is love. Martinism teaches us how to love one another and express ourselves fully. And this is what matters." Martinism seeks to allow us to discover that divine, transcendent love that unites all men, all women, all human beings of every creed, every background, every social class, through that one divine love, symbolized there by that image of le sacre coeur, the sacred heart. It is this love, this divine love that we seek to imitate. It is this divine love that we seek to embody within our hearts, learn how to unfold the rose upon that golden cross, and manifest the stone of the wise through that upon the world. So keep that in mind whenever we get into deeper intellectual concepts. Is everyone seeing my screen right now?
No.
No, it's just your profile pic.
Oh no. Then give me just 1 second to fix that. See if I can. It says I'm okay. Now can you see it?
Yes.
Much better. All right. So let's continue on and get started with this. So what is Martinism? Getting a little more specific into how the tradition manifests its mystery. Martinism is a Christian school of the Western Esoteric Tradition that seeks to reawaken in its initiates the knowledge and experience of their own divine origins and powers, so that we may once again exist in the fullness of the divine immensity. This pursuit is undertaken not solely for the benefit of just the individual, but for all of humanity and every spirit that suffers outside the pale of divine grace. So what does that mean? We are working with a Christian esoteric symbol set that has Gnostic elements to it, Sethian elements, Kabbalistic elements, alchemical, Judaic, Christian, Masonic, Rosicrucian, and we work through a myth of the creation of man, the emanation of the universe, the emanation of the first man, the fall of man into error, into illusion, into matter. And we seek to rectify that fall through knowledge of ourself, knowledge of the world around us, and knowledge of divinity, to make those three come back into correspondence with each other. This is primarily done through the first three founders of the Martinist tradition, from left to right: Martinez de Pasqually and his magical Eloquent, Jean-Baptiste Willermoz, founder of the rite écossais rectifié, that is the rectified Scottish rite, and the CBCS, its inner order, and Louis Claude de Saint-Martin, the unknown philosopher. And then finally, these were codified into the modern Martinist tradition by Pappas, Dr. Gerard Uncas. So tonight we're going to tap into each of these characters. And again, I didn't show you the slide. We're going to tap into each of these characters, explore some of what their origins are, some of what their primary teachings are in the first few degrees of each of their systems, how they each present the Martinizist myth in their own way, how they work it in their own ways, and then finally, how we have in the OMS brought these all together into a holistic system that unites all three of them. So very first, that's Pasqually, Willermoz, Saint-Martin. The first aspect of Martinism were the magical rites of Pasqually's Eloquent. And I have a whole series of webinars on just this. We're going to just touch upon it a little bit. But there's a whole series of webinars about this if you're interested and want to learn some more. So you see on the left the silhouette of the past master, Don Martin de Pasqually. You see on the right a stylized version of the full seal of the Eloquent. You might recognize within that some elements that later fed into the Scottish Rite: a 9-pointed star, a hexagram in the center, several concentric circles, the Chi-Rho in the center. You see a cross with 4 different planetary sigils: Saturn, Luna, etc., etc. You see in the 4 quarters sigils or stylized writings of 4 primary archangels: Raphael, Gabriel, Michael, and Uriel. This was a magical system that brought you through a system of initiation founded upon early 1750s haute grade or high-grade Freemasonic rites. It was one of the first high-grade rites of Europe, birthed out of France, the beginning of the Enlightenment era. And you see here 3 diagrams that show, in one sense, 3 stages of reality, 3 stages of consciousness. On the left, that diagram, you see a hex, you see the divine light above. You see the eye of the world, the eye of the eternal, emanating out the universe in a pattern quite similar to that of the Kabbalistic tree life we are used to, but also different. The sun, the moon, the Shin, Iao, manifests down into the waters of creation, into the dark chaos of the nothingness, man. And you see man enfolded within the hexagram, emanated within the 6 thoughts, the 6 days of creation, a very significant number in Martinism. And you see him with direct communication with Yod He Vav He, with the Old Testament deity. And he begins his first operations. But unfortunately, as we know from both traditional biblical accounts and from Kabbalistic accounts and Gnostic accounts of the supposed fall of man, or what is termed the fall of man falling of his own free will into ignorance and blindness, and that is symbolized here in this second image. And this shows within that same hexagram, within the 6 thoughts, man and woman divided, separated, looking against each other. You see man working, being influenced by the demon, by the fallen spirits. You could say by the serpent, perhaps. You see him here communicating with the serpent. In the Yellow Kohen, they make these myths of the Old Testament very visceral, very, they come alive. You go through them, sometimes in not very pleasant manners. And through a very long initiation, it's about 4 hours, the first degree of the Yellow Kohen. You go through 3 degrees at once. The blue band, the first class. Over a period of about 3 or 4 hours, you will go through the experience of the creation of the world, the fall of man, and the beginning steps of his reconciliation. Over here on the right, we jump way ahead in the degree system to one emblem, one image of completion or of rectification. You see the sun shining above, the sun shining below, all the lights in between. And there are very many that have been retained within the modern Scottish Rite, but they're definitely different as well, and generally a lot more simple. But that is just one way of looking at this 3-stage process of emanation, what Kabbalah might call the shavira, the shattering of the vessels, and then tikkun, or restoration, or as Martinists call it, reintegration. Let's look a little deeper into how these degrees might work for the Yellow Kohen. You would come in to your first degree. You would already be a master mason, generally, though he did begin initiating women very early on. He was initiating women as early as the 1760s. And you experience the birth of the universe through those 6 circles. Bereshit, the first book of the Bible, Genesis, the 6 thoughts of creation, like we talked about. Man would then move from the 6 to the 5. The 5 in traditional classic Lurianic Kabbalah is a number of Geburah, which is the number, the Sephirot, where the vessels, the Sephirot were unable to contain the light anymore, and they shattered, falling down into the chaos. And that was the beginning of the dark elements of matter. So in this second degree, after man has, of his own free will and accord, created the fall, he has to go through learning what it's like to be in matter, to be stuck in a body that corrupts, to be stuck in a body that hungers, to be stuck in a body subject to pain, to time, to death, to decay. And you note that there are 5 candles there in a certain configuration. You notice there are 5 circles and a tomb with the skull. After a very visceral experience in the second degree, he finally comes to a period of redemption, an aspiration. He moves from the 5 back to the 3, to the Trinity, to the ternary spirits, and he begins his elevation back towards the light through a process of expiation, through a process of prayer, through a process of rectifying that which he himself had wronged. You note that there are 9 candles because he is still stuck within the number of matter. Number 9 in the Yellow Kohen is a specific number for matter. 3 times 3, or 3 plus 3 plus 3. There's a very unique arithmosophy or number theory to Martinism. There are many similarities to Kabbalistic gematria, but also many radical differences. And here within the cross and the triangle, he begins his first prayers to open the portals of the universe and reopen his mystical vision, his mystical hearing, and his powers of regeneration, as well as dissolution, dissolving the parts of himself that are not worthy of being vessels and containers of the divine light. Pasqually would continue this process through an 11-degree system. And the koan can be classed into 4 different ways. On the left, the most simple overarching classes, 3 classes with a secret class: the porch, the temple, the sanctuary. So you can imagine, similar to the Hiramic myth, that you are approaching the temple in steps. First the porch, then the temple, then the sanctuary, then finally entering this Holy of Holies. It can also be classed as 7 classes, which subdivide these 3 classes. The symbolic lodge, those are the first election of Adam, that is the primary archetype or patriarch that you are embodying and whose myth you are going through. That is composed of 3 degrees: symbolic apprentice, companion, and symbolic master, first degree of the order. And those are the images that you saw a bit of a moment ago. The second chapter, the second class, is the chapter of Elu. We notice that term was used much later as well. That is a term that has continued to be used. That is the second election of Abraham. The myth now progresses to the patriarch of Abraham and the black band. So it's a black sash. And this is the Mater Elu, the master Elu, the master elect, also called perfect master Elu or Grand Mater Elu. Notice the word koan isn't there yet. You are still just elected. The third class bridges you now into the temple. This is the conclave of the koans, the priests. This is the beginning of the third election of Moses and the red band. 3 degrees conferred at one time together: apprentice koan, companion koan, master koan, or mater elu koan. So it replays this apprentice, companion, master. And here is when you really start to engage in planetary magical operations. Your magical operations begin right when you start in the order, 3rd, 4th degree, but here they get much more intense, much more involved. This red band also bridges into the sanctuary and the conclave of grand architects, or the tabernacle. Grand architects of the tabernacle, the 4th class. Grand Master Koan, Grand Architect. This degree is going to focus on uniting that which was split in the beginning, uniting the split forces of Adam and Eve back into the unity. Within this sanctuary, you have the grand chapter, the 5th class. That's the beginning of the 4th election of Zerubbabel and the green band. Obviously, this myth has been retained in certain degrees in the Scottish Rite, as well as the mythology of the 4th degree of Willer Moses' rectified Scottish Rite. The green representing the water green of the river Star Buzanari, through which the Israelites had to pass over to return to the Holy Land, the Promised Land. And this is the 9th degree of Grand Elu of Zerubbabel, Knight of the Orient. That title has obviously been retained in certain Masonic rites. And lastly, in that sanctuary, you come to the porch of the tribunal. So again, we come back to this porch symbolism. Even when you come to this high degree, you're just at the porch of the Holy of Holies. And this is Command of the Orient, Apprentice Roquois. You have now gone through the totality of the myth, and you're awaiting that final capstone, that final realization, that final sacrifice to take the step into the Holy of Holies, where traditionally the Kohen Agadul, the high priest of Israel, whether we're talking about the tabernacle in the wilderness or the temple of Jerusalem, even he would only enter beyond the veil of the Holy of Holies once a year to speak the divine name, to speak the word. And even when he did that, he had a cordelier, a cord around his waist, so that the other priests could drag him out if after he said that word, he died. And this is the sovereign tribunal. You can say the Grand Council, perhaps. The 5th election of Jesus Christ and the white band. He now bridges from the Old Testament to the New Testament, the law of love, through a sacrifice. And this is the ro qua, which is a play on words. Ro can mean red, It can also be an allusion to rose, for rose croix. It is also an allusion to Adam, the first Adam, who is said to be formed of the red Adamic earth, the red Adamic clay. For Adam was a golem until the breath of God was breathed upon him. Now, it's very important as we look at these myths, as we look at these symbols, these spirits, these concepts, that we understand that this is a myth. Especially in the LMS, we are very, very careful with our words. Precision of language is a major thing with us. We are not saying that this is literal fact. We are not saying that it's historical truth. We are saying that it is a myth. It is the myth of the tradition. Now, some scholars may toss out certain things because maybe it's not confirmable in a historical, scholarly way. But in some ways, a member said to me recently that a myth can be truer than fact, because fact may be dependent upon time and place or circumstances, whereas a myth can be transcendent, can transcend time and space. It can transcend culture, gender, race, class, age. A myth is only real as far as we make it real within ourselves, as far as it awakens something true within our hearts, something that recognizes it. The myth is here to guide us through a system, a verifiable system in which your tutors, your leaders, the people you put your trust in, are able to verify where you are in your stage. It's a repeatable process. Just like the Hiramic myth of regular Freemasonry is not considered a factual, historical fact. Now, we know that individual did exist in the Bible, but the myth that we go through is not biblical. It is definitely non-canonical. It is inspired, just like the Rosicrucian myths are inspired. I don't believe that Christian Rosenkreutz was a literal person who went to a wedding and fell down and got catapulted up and all this crazy stuff. But it is true nonetheless, and it awakens something within you nonetheless. Some people might not believe that Jesus Christ was a historical person. We know that Josephus talks about Jesus of Nazareth as a historical person, but did this individual actually commit or perform miracles? Was he actually the Son of God? We don't answer those kinds of questions for you. We postulate, we give you the myth, we give you the tradition, and we leave the conclusions to the individual. It is of utmost importance to us that the individual is allowed to come to their own understanding. And this is where Martinism really shines, in that it gives you a symbol set. You work with it. You make these symbols come alive within yourself. We're not creating automatons, people who repeat things back to us exactly the way we said it. We want you to come to your own conclusions. It's kind of like jazz, though. You have to learn the rules of music, the scale, harmonics, the circle of fifths. Then you can break it and create something with jazz. So when we talk about this myth, be very aware that we treat this as a myth, as a tradition, as a spiritually inspired story. Okay? Now, this process would go on. In the Yellow Koan, it was special because he brought the high-grade Masonic rites of the time, made them magical, made them grimoire, ceremonial magic invocations of angels, of spirits, suppressions and exorcisms of demons and fallen spirits. You could say that these are parts of your psyche, that they are Jungian archetypes. You could say that they are literal beings in the universe and within man. Again, we leave that to you to discover. I will say, though, once someone truly engages in this work, some very interesting things will occur, and they will know rather quickly what their opinion is, though that opinion may change over time. So he went through a magical way of presenting the Martinist myth, Pasqually. He had primary students such as Louis-Claude de Saint-Martin, such as Jean-Baptiste Willermoz, who both took the Martinist myth, the Martinisist myth, the Elocoan myth, and transformed it in their own way and passed it on in their own way. Pasqually died in 1774 in Haiti and was buried in an unmarked grave. But he was said to, after his death, be seen in the backs of lodges, in the shadows of a ritual. And this is part of where this idea of silhouette started coming into the tradition, this idea of evoking the past masters. Past masters in Martinism form a very strong key. They are your connection to what we call an egregore, or a a current, a spirit that should enliven you and inspire you and speak to you. So we work with these emblems to meditate on them. We work with them as we read their writings, as we perform our prayers, and we hope to be inspired by them. The book Meditations on the Tarot, published anonymously, though the writer was revealed posthumously, he answers each one of his 22 letters with "Dear Unknown Friend." And in his preface, he says that through my writings, you will come to understand me much more than any profane personality of who I am. That's why I published it anonymously. It's not that we are worshiping these individuals. We are admiring and aspiring to the example they set, the symbol they represent. It's not a cult of personality. It is not something where you idolize Pasqually or Saint Martin or Willermoz or any master, living or past. They are merely guideposts, symbols, key points of aspiration. We seek to emulate their good qualities. Now, the Yellow Koan, the oldest version of the Scottish Rite rituals, recently came to light through the Baylot manuscript, FM 415, also now called the Manuscript of Saint-Domingue or Santo Domingo. It's kind of funny they use Spanish instead of French. And it contains the oldest drawing of the encampment of the princes of the 32nd degree of the royal secret. It also contains a series of Yellow Koan, very primitive Yellow Koan documents, very primitive forms of the catechisms, incense, a listing of officers, signature of Martin de Pasqually, right there, and an early Yellow Koan circle. So this leads some to believe that, and it was appended to the end of the manuscript, the end of the Ordre du Royal Secret. This makes some believe that perhaps the intention was at the end of this degree, at the end of the capstone of the Masonic, regular Masonic Scottish Rite, that perhaps you would begin your Yellow Koan training. And we know for a fact that that is what happened in the rectified Scottish Rite in CBCS of Willermoz, which we'll talk about next for a little bit. There is a lecture of this. It has caused quite a stir a couple of times because some people don't want people knowing about these rites. Nonetheless, we are here to shed light and show documents that are already out there publicly if you have access to the internet and French libraries. But the CBCS of Willermoz, he took the magic out, at least in the outer order, and he focused on knightly chivalry. The strict observance, as we know, was a German Masonic rite that was based on Templarism, and it had a much different heretical Masonic myth. It did not use the Hieronymic myth, but there are very similar elements. It used a Knights Templar myth, dealing with the arrest of the Templars, Jacques de Molay, the emigration of one named Pierre Aumont to France, and a supposed secret line of succession from the Templars down to the strict observance through Prince Bonnie Charles Edward Stuart II, down to Baron von Hund, and then eventually Jean-Baptiste Willermoz, who was selected at 1778 to revise the strict observance and created the Rite Ecossais Rectifié, the rectified Scottish Rite. The rectified Scottish Rite was composed of 3 degrees. The ones that are crossed out, those are crossed out because we do not confer those. We do not confer Masonic degrees. We are not a Masonic order, the OMS, or Martinism in general. And out of respect for Freemasonry, we do not work those craft degrees. Martinist rites have always worked RER and CBCS in amity, but independent from Grand Lodge jurisdictions. I have a whole lecture on that. We're not going to get into it right now. It's a very long political discussion. Those are the classic craft degrees, but they were planting the seeds for Templarism. And in the green class, Scottish Master of St. Andrew, actually, let's back up for a second. Just as we showed emblems or circles, tracing boards of the first 3 Yellow Koan degrees, these are the tracing boards or emblems, not tracing boards, but emblems of the first 3 rectified Scottish Rite degrees. First degree, ad hoc stat. It still stands. The order still stands. The temple still stands. And all you see are the broken pillars. The idea that greed, vanity, arrogance destroyed the original Temple of Solomon, as well as destroyed the Templar order. And this is a symbol of hope. It's a symbol that Pierre Aumont and the Templar lineage mythologically survived. It takes on deeper meaning in the later degrees. The second degree is a symbol of a perfect stone with a square on it. And it says dirigit obliqua, which means he makes the crooked straight. That's one way to interpret that Latin. These degrees are quite similar to the blue degrees you are familiar with, but there are elements such as chamber of reflection. There are elemental trials that the candidate must go through. There are definitely some deeper things that you still see in rites like the Swedish rite today. Or elements that you might see a little bit in Pike's Red degrees, but without the Templarism. The third degree emblem is in silentio spe fortitudo mea. Those words can sometimes be permutated as well. And it's a symbol of a boat without a mast or a rudder. So it's a symbol of a boat just floating aimlessly upon the sea, which on its surface is an emblem of the Templar order after the fall, that it's an emblem of Pierre Aumont, their mythological master of the strict observance, sailing to France. It can also be taken more esoterically as a symbol of consciousness, floating upon the waters of creation, upon the waters of chaos, like Noah in the ark, rising above the waters of creation, 40 days and 40 nights of flood, which occurs in the third degree of the Yellow Cone. So there are a lot of similarities that he put into the rectified Scottish Rite, which you cannot know unless you actually have Cohen background. When they come to the fourth degree, which is the bridge between the inner order and the outer order, the Scottish Master of St. Andrew, on the left is a tracing board from 1784. On the right is a modern redrawing tracing board of the Temple Destrué. The temple is in ruins, the temple destroyed, the same temple we talked about. It represents the Temple of Solomon, it represents the Templars, it represents matter and the breaking of the original perfection of divinity. Not divinity, I shouldn't say, but the original perfection of the first lights that broke in the Kabbalistic Shavira, or the fall, that which we seek to rectify. But the pillars still stand, ad hoc stat. The pillars still stand, the base of the pillars, in which was contained all the mysteries of the universe. The candidate goes through a series of tracing boards. On the left is a 1784 tracing board, related, but not directly of this rite, but there's some similarities in there if you know what you're looking for. And he would come to discover the tomb of Hiram, or the tomb of a prior of the Templar order. In their myth, a Templar prior was murdered. And they come to discover that tomb. And that tomb, the image in the center, covers the one on the right. The one on the right is a symbol of the holy place, of the tabernacle and the temple. And through a series of circumambulations with sword in one hand and trowel in the other, to fight and defend against the enemies, both biblical, just like Zerubbabel fighting the enemies of Israel as they return back to the Holy Land with the permission of King Cyrus, and with trowel in the other to spread the cement of brotherly love, of union, that which unites us into one brotherhood, that of the divine love, the sacred heart that we showed earlier. These symbols should take on a more spiritual meaning. He comes to rediscover their tools that he learned of before, now with a more esoteric meaning. He unveils the 7-branch candlestick, the table of shewbread, the laver of brass, the Ark of the Covenant, and finally, in the center, he unveils the divine word with JBM, which can have a number of associations, both in regular Masonic traditions, in the Scottish rectified Scottish Rite and strict observance of Jacobus Burgundus de Molay, and maybe other things. And when he utters the divine name, the fire, the sacred fire, is restored within him and within the temple. And he arises as Hiram resurrected, his eyes covering his eyes, his hand covering his eyes, because he's blinded by the divine light of divinity. It is so bright that he can't even look directly at it. And then he is taught to learn to build on the right, this is a modern redrawing, rebuild the Temple of Jerusalem, build the New Jerusalem, which is a spiritual temple, the way that the Rosicrucians postulated. A church, a temple not made with human hands, eternal in the heavens. Just as the original temple of the Cohen, the original divine vastness or divine immensity, the pleroma, the fullness. was a temple not made with hands. It was spiritual. It was immaterial. He learns to do that to discover the secret of the Lamb upon the book of the 7 seals in order to reopen and break those 7 seals. You see a perfect ashlar. You see an incomplete, a rough ashlar. You see the divine light of divinity and St. Andrew's cross, because St. Andrew is the patron of this degree. So you can see how there are elements that you, if you are a Freemason, because I know this is not just a Masonic call, there are elements that you are quite familiar with. There are some elements that you might have had some mythology about, but they tie it together so beautifully. And of course, I don't believe literally that there was a murdered sub-prior. I don't believe literally necessarily that Pierre Aumont, an anagram for Notuma, which is a password we've seen in many rites, that he traveled to France and carried on a lineage. But hey, maybe. It is the mythological history of the order, and there is value in it, regardless of whether it's historical or not. Regardless, it is a powerful myth to work through, and the virtues are powerful virtues to learn to inculcate within yourself. I'm going to jump back a couple slides to give you context on where we're going next. So we talked about the craft degrees, the green class, the bridge, that was the haute grade, the high grade of the RER. And then it bridges into a secret class, the CBCS. Even the 4th degrees did not even know that the 5th and 6th degrees existed. And the double secret class, even the 6th degrees did not know that the 7th and 8th degrees existed. They were double sub rosa. So you come next into the white class, the secret class. It's called green because blue because it's the Blue Lodge, green because it's a green temple, white because it's a white temple. They're also alchemical, perhaps to a degree. And then you come to the double secret class. Yeah, someone's smiling. Someone almost laughed at that cheesy joke. I make a lot of cheesy jokes. Gotta have fun, right? And then you come into the double secret class. We're gonna jump into that secret class for just a moment. And here's where you come into knighthood. The 5th degree of squire novice. A squire is basically a knight's errand boy. It is an apprentice to a knight. This is an example of a modern CBCS temple. And on the right is a 1784 temple by Ferdinandus, the Prince of Brunswick-Luneburg. I'm gonna let you soak that up with your eyes for just a moment. Recognize the 3 crosses. There are also 2 more on the sides, making for a total of 5 equal-armed Templar crosses, red upon white. In the center, you notice that we use a Templar boson, black above, white below. Some groups will just use a white, no black. You notice the regalia, the sword, the gloves. Notice also on the left and on the right, those alchemical emblems. On the left, the phoenix rising from the ashes, and we used a shin below it to represent that resurrection through the spirit, that resurrection from sacrifice. In God I was born. In Christ I died. I was resurrected through the Holy Spirit, as the Golden Dawn 5 = 6 Adeptus Minor degree says. On the right, you see an emblem of the pelican, feeding its young by its own breast. Another symbol of sacrifice, of caring for those, for your children, for your young. And that should be an inspiration to all of us who are leaders in any way, or parents, community leaders. But it's also an alchemical image of the retort, where through the process of distillation, it comes back down into itself and continues a continuous process of refinement, of alchemical refinement, as the virtues that you learned in the previous degree now take on deeper meaning and come into practice. And you learn what it is to be a knight. It's a lot of rules to be a knight. Some of the original rules of the Templars, the primitive rule of the Templars, are really strict. Some of them, like you're not allowed to have pointy shoes because you might feel vain. You eventually progress into the 6th degree Beneficent Knight of the Holy City, Chevalier Bienfaisant de la Cité Sainte. On the left is an image that looks very similar to it, to what it looks like. You see an emblem of the regalia that you receive. You see an emblem of the Master's regalia. And this is, you are dubbed a frère, a brother, Chevalier du Christ et de la Cité Sainte, a brother and knight of Christ and of the Holy City. One of the controversies of the strict observance was that the mythology of the unknown superiors, this idea of, I don't want to say ascended masters, that was a much later term by the Theosophists, but maybe we can use that if you're not familiar with the term. Idea of secret masters that lead and direct the order from afar, that will one day come to you if you're blessed enough. That came out of favor after Baron von Hoot died and no one showed up. So the official story that they told at the 1778 convention, in which they revised and created the RER, was that they were dumping the Templar symbolism, but that is not true in the least. They just dumped it from the outer order, from the Force 4 degrees. And in the inner order, the secret order, they carried on that Templar symbolism and refined it. They made it less literal, more symbolic, more inspired. There's been a lot of chat about, like, is Masonry descended from the Templars? I don't know. I don't care. Historically, you're going to have all kinds of arguments. It seems historically that it is a fabrication. It is a myth, probably generated first by Chevalier Michael Andrew Ramsay, who happened to be tutor to Prince Bonnie Charles Edward Stuart, who initiated Baron von Hoot and supposedly initiated Pasqually's father. And that's where Pasqually got his patent from. It was inherited from his father. Now, whether or not those things are true, again, the myth still speaks for itself. It is inspiring. It inspires you to become more than human, to become better than just a profane, to become what you are meant to be, to regain your original glory, your first estate. I'm going to grab something real quick to read as an inspiration. If I can find it. Willermo's crafted a fantastic document called The Rule of the Order in 9 Points. And it's not a rule like a bylaws. He has bylaws. This is more of a spiritual bylaw. It begins with, "O you who have just been initiated into the bosom of wisdom, child of virtue and of peace, give our words a listening ear and let your soul open to the lessons of truth. We will teach you the path to a happy life. We will teach you the ecstasy of your source. We will teach you to cultivate with vitality and success all the capacities that Providence has entrusted to you, and so make yourself an aid of mankind and a partaker of the mysteries and blessings of the divine." I'll read one more section, Article 2, the immortality of the spirit. "Man, king of the world, masterpiece of creation, who the eternal animated by his breath, meditate on your sublime election. Everything around you, all that lives, both the vegetable and animal realm, perish with time and is subject to your empire, your immortal spirit. Your secret center is one, all, and emanating from the bosom of the divine, and it shall serve all material things and never die. That is the true patent of your nobility, the living seal of your happiness. This you have forgotten. Through pride of your mind, you plunged yourself into the abyss of the oblivion. By your own will, you have degraded yourself. There's the fall. Despite your original and present grandeur, what are you now compared to the eternal? Adore the infinite while in the mire of the finite. Carefully separate your heavenly, indestructible principle from the foreign alloys you are now composed of. Cultivate your immortal spirit and perfect your soul so that this holy unction will be a temple of pure light. When from your being you release the vapors of coarse matter, it is alchemical in nature. Thus you will be freed from the chains of slavery, attain happiness in this bosom of misfortune, unwavering in the tempest of life, and you shall die without fear." That is what we're trying to inculcate in this kind of a knighthood, is a spiritual knighthood. Now, this would progress. This might be the last degree that most people ever get to. But if you were privileged enough to be received into the secret order, the Order of the Grand Professed, OGP, you would come into the 7th degree, Chevalier professed knight. Professed comes from Christian monasticism and monastic holy orders. You make a profession to come in as a brother, as a monk, as a sister, as a whatever the term is for that specific order, whether you're Carmelite, Benedictine, etc., etc. You make a profession of faith, and you swear a profession to live the ideals of that order, of that monasticism. Now, in profession, you can make what's called a simple profession, where maybe you profess for 1 or 2 years. You've already done your outer order work. I can't think of the term right now, your squire work. Now you're making a profession for 1 or 2 years, let's say, or maybe 5. And then if you're ready for the full lifetime of being in that monastery or in that order, you would make a grand profession, a solemn profession. That is the 8th degree of grand professed knight, grand prof. At 8th degree, Willermoes would unveil the true purpose of the rectified Scottish rite, which is to initiate you into the Elu Cohen and to begin magical training, theurgy, divine working, alchemically transmuting your nature, the nature of the world around you, so that the light of divinity may shine through you and through all that you touch. In the center is an original manuscript of the secret instructions of the Grand Professed. On the left is Willermoes' very, very bad handwritten drawing of the universal table, one of the key diagrams of the Martinist or Elu Cohen cosmology. A lot of similarities to the Tree of Life, a lot of differences. And on the right is what's called the key to the universal table. They are one and the same, those 2 diagrams, but he shows it in different ways so you can understand. These numbers here that you see on the right, these are all numbers of spirits, classes of spirits. The divine, the eternal, the 10 spirits of the eternal Father, the 8, the spirits of the major spirit, the spirits of Christ, the 7, the spirits of the inferior, the spirits of the Holy Spirit, and the 3, the ternary spirits, the first spirits of fire, of the central axis of fire, as they call it, that created the universe. And eventually this flips. We're not going to get into it. You can see my other lectures about it's a very deep process. Look into Intro to Martinism Part 1 and Pasqually's Magical Rites if you're interested in this myth. But then at some point man gets emanated, the 4, the minor, and he is meant to be birthed in the center of the 3 lights, in the center of the supernal triad, composed of their lights, composed of the secret fire. And it is his job to rectify that which has gone wrong. It may be controversial still today to say that the CBCS taught ceremonial magic, but it is an irrefutable truth, especially after we have translated 30 years of letters between Jean-Baptiste Willermoes and Duke Charles of Hesse, who is a very prominent Freemason who was involved in the Golden Rosenkreuz, the Asiatic Brethren, Deus et Lux Universalis, and a number of other secret orders that have never even been written about. This individual and Willermoes, he was a member of the CBCS of the Elu Cohen. They talk about the things we are teaching our CBCS Grand Professed, about teaching them about theurgy, teaching them about our master Pasqually's rites, and about theurgy. So it is irrefutable that they were teaching and initiating into ceremonial magic at the highest degrees of the rectified Scottish rite. So there's my little 20-minute spiel on the CBCS. We are about 50 minutes in, so I'm going to move on to Louis-Claude de Saint-Martin. This is the one that everyone knows the most. This is the one people generally think of when they think of Martinism, the Martinist tradition, Ordre Martiniste, Traditional Martinist Order, TMO, OMCC, MOUP, Martinist Order of Unfound Philosophers, Ordre Martiniste Souvrains, Ordre Martiniste Chevalier du Christ, etc., etc. There are numerous Martinist orders out there, and all of them have their strengths. All of them have a valid lineage these days. The idea of lineage wars is a silly one. Robert Ambalan in the 60s rectified Martinist lineages, and I would say that 98% of Martinist orders have a valid lineage. The question isn't about lineage, it's about teachings. It's about current. So this is also another webinar. It's another 90-minute webinar, Saint-Martin, The Way of the Heart. We go into just his talks. He's also part of Intro to Martinism Part 3. So Saint-Martin is said to have disavowed the magical teachings of Pasqually. He is said to have left Freemasonry. He is said to have abandoned the so-called external path of magic and theurgy for an internal path of contemplative Christian prayer and mysticism. All those statements are true, but all those statements are also they're gross generalizations. Saint Martin did, in fact, leave Freemasonry and asked for his name to be stricken from all rosters. He even left the rectified Scottish Rite and the CBCS. But he did help Willermoes to write them. He did help Willermoes to write years of lessons and lectures. And be on the lookout very soon. I'm hoping this month, but it's a busy month. We will be releasing, for the first time in English, not just Willermoes' Lessons of Lyon, but Willermoes, Saint Martin, and Dr. Rives' Lessons of Lyon, spanning several years. And they are Elocoan lessons about theurgy, about magic. We've also released a couple of years ago 10 Instructions of Men and Desire, and those are 10 lessons by Saint Martin on the Elocoan, on theurgy, on spirits. But at some point, he did choose to focus more on an inner contemplative path, and he became enamored with Jakobuma. And when we say that we study theosophy, we mean the ancient theosophy. We mean the 1600s, 1700s German theosophy of Jakobuma, of Pasqually, of Willermoes, of Saint Martin, Theosophia, love of wisdom, divine wisdom, wisdom of God. We do not at all mean the late 1800s, late 19th century Theosophical Society of Madame Blavatsky. They're extremely different. You see on their left an image of the Sacred Heart, La Voie Cardiaque, the way of the heart. The red cross birthing from it, crown of thorns and the tears or blood, the light of the divine emanating from it, 10 stars representing the 10 lights of the eternal, the 10 Sephirot, 10 the number of God in the Elocoan. And you see on the right the 3-branch candelabra, one of the most important symbols within the Martinist tradition, regardless of branch. They represent all aspects of the ternary, the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, Iao, God, man and the universe, heaven, earth, and hell, salt, sulfur, mercury, etc., and numerous other applications. Negredo, rubedo, albedo. They are the 3 lights that light every Martinist temple, despite what organization you're in. And they are the 3 lights we seek to aspire towards. The law, precept, and commandment of the divine. The thought, will, and word of the first man and of God. They are the lights that we seek to ignite within our hearts, our own conscience, our own inner guiding light. Like we said, Martinism is not here to teach you a dogma that you blindly accept. It's here to teach you a symbol set, a tradition, a myth in which we know that we can replicate the same alchemical processes through. And then eventually you need to come to your own conclusions. Within the OMS, you are required to write your own Martinist myth in your own words. It may be a child's story, maybe a fairy tale, maybe a song, maybe a work of art, some way in which you will translate and pass on the light of Martinism in your own way in the 21st century. And reading those myths when they come in is just one of the great rewards of this path of service. In Martinism, our goal is to become unknown lights in the darkness. Standing as unknowns to the world, veiled, with no interest of self-gain, financial gain, political gain, but to stand as divine lights within ourselves, within our communities, within the world, and to shed that light upon others. First upon ourselves, for in Kabbalah, in order to restore the world, you must first do tikkun hanefesh, restore your own soul, your own fallen nature. Only then can you turn around and perform tikkun ha'olam, restoration of the world, reintegration of the world. And through these lights, through these practices, we aspire to be worthy of fulfilling that practice. The Martinist tradition, as codified by Pappas, Dr. Gerard and Koss in the late 1800s, circa 1888, 1891, depending how you look at it, codified into 3 degrees: 1st degree, 2nd degree, 3rd degree. Associate, initiate, superior, and connu, or unknown superior. So they tapped back into that unknown superior title of the strict observance. But it takes on a completely spiritual meaning now. It's not literal. though some things can happen. It is a spiritual meaning. And this is an example of what the OMS has done. We have taken those 3 rites that we've talked about briefly, the Yellow Koan, the CBCS, the Void Cardiac, the Martinist Order, and we've combined them. We've kicked the outer order to the inner order to the outer order. So at first degree, our title is Associate Elu, and you work within the confines of the traditional Martinist Order of Associate, of Papist and Saint Martin, but we heavily infuse and focus upon the work of Martin de Pasqually, the founder of the tradition, the first order of the Yellow Koan. There's a lot of ceremony and magic. There's a lot of prayers. There's your first evocation of spirits. And this on the left is a sampling of some of the curriculum that you receive in the first degree. These are just the printed books. You also get something like 5 gigs or something of digital materials, which you don't need to study, but they're there for those like me who kind of geek out on things, you know, and really want to compare and see how, you want to see how other orders do it? Here's their initiation rituals. You want to see their curriculum? Here's theirs. Our goal is to veil nothing except the truth, which you veil from yourself anyways. Our goal is to give you everything. And you're able to compare and see how Ordre Martiniste does theirs. See how we're similar, see how we're different. See how other, I'm not going to name a bunch of orders, but see how 8 different rites do their works. And through your prayers, through your practices, this is a 2-year degree, minimum 1 year to 2 year degree, usually 2 years for most people, because there's a lot to digest. You're also allowed access to the initiations of the first 3 degrees of the Yellow Koan. You're also allowed ordination within the Gnostic, Theosophic, and Apostolic Orthodox Church of the first 3 Ordinas Minor of Cleric, Doorkeeper, and Reader. And in this degree, you lay the foundation. You learn the symbols of the tradition, the history, the beginning practices. Though I would say that our first degree goes through more practices than most SIs have in other orders. In the second degree of Initiate Chevalier, here's a sampling of some of the material given to the Initiate Chevalier. You come into a knightly tradition, a spiritual knighthood, still working the traditional Martinist path of Papists and Ordre Martiniste, but heavily infused and focused on the spiritual knighthood of Willermose's CBCS and the inspiration of the Templars. Hence the Templar regalia on the right, hence various symbols for those with eyes to see and ears to hear. You still continue your Koan work, and the Koan operations you began in the first degree will now get ramped up. And you perform a 9-month operation quite similar to the Abramelin operation. The Yellow Koan was the first initiatory organization that used the Holy Guardian Angel, or as they called it, the Good Companion, Le Bon Compagnon. Not just as an operation, like a document like the Abramelin, but as a part of an initiatory grade structure, with guidance, with teaching, with mentorship. Your goal here is to seek union with your Holy Guardian Angel. A mighty task indeed. So this degree is always at least 2 years, because there's a lot to do. It is a tall order. You also become exposed more fully to the Rosicrucian tradition, and you begin reading about the history of the Rose-Croix d'Orient, which is a very pregnant Rosicrucian branch out of France, with a very, very simple ordination that we consider kind of to be the egregore of the Rosicrucian tradition. You also receive your first preliminary documents for the Frere d'Orient, the Brothers of the East, and a bunch of other stuff. And there's an image of Willermose because he is the primary past master that rules over the second degree. When at last you come to the third degree, Superior Inconnu, Unknown Superior, SI. Here's a sampling of some of the materials that begin to come available at that point. You come to the end of the traditional Martinist path. It culminates all the work that you've done before in the Yellow Koan, the CBCS, and Le Voie Cardiaque. It focuses heavily upon Saint Martin and the Rosicrucian ideals of Rosicrucian love, of healing the sick pro bono, the Gnostic principles of being a priest, hence the chalice, in the act of becoming a master of oneself, so that you may become a servant of others. And in this degree, the third degree, the first two degrees are merely preparatory. It is said that there is only one initiation to Martinism, and it is the SI degree. This is the full conferral of the light of Martinism, and done right, it should confer gnosis, enlightenment, whatever you want to call it. I really don't like those catchphrases. It should confer truth. This is an example of how the OMS has taken these ancient systems of Yellow Koan, which you see that branch here on the left, the CBCS, and the Voie Cardiaque, and united them into one holistic system. Everyone begins here at first degree. We have a lot of Roquois, that's the highest Yellow Koan. We have a lot of bishops. We have a lot of grand professed, SIIs, grand masters of their orders that join OMS, and everyone starts at first degree. I did too. Everyone starts over. Everyone works through the system because the things that we do are very different from what any other tradition is doing out there. And that's not meant to be egotistical. It's not meant to be like that. It's meant to be, we want everyone when they come to third degree to have a full grasping of all three branches of this tradition so they can turn around the next day and become a temple master. They can turn around the next day and start initiating properly into it. So everyone starts at first degree, then second degree, then third degree. And at third degree, we open up. Their first Rosicrucian ordination is the Rose Croix d'Orient, as I like to call it, the Rosicrucian egregore, or the Rosicrucian etheric link, similar to how the Ware Ra Temple of the Golden Dawn had their etheric link back to the original masters. And you enter the college of the SIs, Le Collège des Supérieurs Inconnus. You also have the option of entering into the major orders of priests, deacon, priest, and bishop within the Gnostic and Orthodox apostolic tradition. You also have the ability to progress through the higher degrees of the Koan, progress through the higher degrees of the CBCS, and then progress through the 7 degrees of the Rosicrucian 7 degrees of the Frere d'Orient, as codified by Demetrius Plato Semelas. And finally, we capstone it with the Isia, Equas a Sancta Ioannas Evangelista, Equas a Sancta Ioannas Apostolica, the Knights of the Holy St. John the Evangelist, the Knights of the Holy St. John the Apostle. And this is a pure Rosicrucian lineage that deals with, well, let's just say, Ecuyer de St. John, Squire of St. John, Chevalier Isia, Knight of St. John, Commandeur Isia, Commander of St. John. It deals with St. John, the Revelator, the Revealer, and it deals with the Apocalypse, and it deals with Revelations. And at the very top are your 3 chiefs that seek to aspire to govern the order and lead the order with humility, with faith, hope, and love, and to pass on the light of Martinism better than we found it. Within the college, here's a sampling of some of the materials and initiations. This picture is 5 years old, by the way. Haven't gotten around to putting them all on the table again lately, but there's a lot of stuff to go through. We don't do the Ambulan Koan rites. We have our own. We started with those. We went through those years ago. But we have, as you guys have seen, translated just about everything. There's a couple things left to finalize and publish. And soon, we'll translate just about everything of the Martinist, Yellow Koan, CBCS tradition. And then it's just about disseminating it and passing on to the next generation. So our Koan rites are unique in the sense that they are rectified by our own hand and our own translations. I learned French just for Martinism. Started with it in community college, did 3-4 years of French, went on to university. Because you really can't study the original tradition unless you speak French. And that's why we've done these translations, so that you can study this without having to study French and spend 10 years translating. We never intended to make an order, by the way. OMS was not intended to become an order. It was intended as 6 SIs and SIIs, free initiators, who were sick of politics. We were sick of order politics and all the things that go on, like the Golden Dawn Flame Wars of the 90s, And we just wanted to be 6 independent SIs studying together. And we gathered around, we printed out everything we had, and we left our last order with the blessing of its founders. And they left that order a couple of years later. And they gave us all their digitals, and we printed everything out and started going through every ritual, every document, every practice, and experimenting. Do we like this opening? Do we like this initiation? Do we like this prayer? Do you like this? And over the past 7 years, we have carefully crafted together what we think are the best lines of each one, the best aspects of each one to make our modern rituals. And then somewhere along the way, someone in Sweden says, hey, I really like what you're doing. Can I join? And he had a temple, and Temple 2 was born. Somewhere along the way, someone in Canada said, hey, I really like what you're doing. Can I join? Temple 3 was born. And then 4, then 5. And we just consecrated Temple 12 last weekend in Washington, D.C. And we also just consecrated a new initiator in Canada. So we're at Temple 13 right now. Those are some examples of the public seals. We don't reveal the names of the temples. We reveal their locations. The names are considered secret because they're something that connects the members. Funny story, that image of DC in the upper right here, I made that seal inspired because I grew up listening to punk rock, Bad Brains. Made that seal, and 2 weeks later, lightning struck the Washington Monument on a full moon, penumbra lunar eclipse with a red moon. And we're like, wow, that's a pass, as Pasqually would call it. A pass is a sign or a synchronicity or a spirit manifesting or a vision. We're like, that's a pass. Like, we're on to something good. And I can say that the brethren that we brought in last week it was one of the most emotional gatherings I've had, one of the most heartfelt, honest gatherings. I teared up at least 3 times during initiations because of just the overwhelming joy and appreciation and awe of the sincerity to which everyone's bringing to this. And this is a labor of love. No one makes any money doing this. In fact, I've probably spent 20 grand traveling the world doing this stuff. But you spend it because it's an investment. It's investment in your spirit, investment in others. And we are an order intending to elevate and create other sovereigns, other masters of themselves. And we've only just begun. So we're at 70 minutes, so I'm going to start wrapping it up so we can have some discussion time. If you are interested at all in the things we talked about, here's a few resources to check out. Martinism.net. It's a pretty simple website, but there's a lot of information on there, especially under education and curriculum. Okay, you can go there and download our public documents, which have everything you need to get started. It has the application, the manifesto, prayers, and the required pre-associate operation. Everyone, regardless of previous Martinist experience, is required to do a 3-month operation in which they start doing Eloquent prayers. And they see if this kind of regimen and discipline is something that they are willing and wanting to do. And it also gives us a chance to get to know you better and see if you're a good fit for us and if we're a good fit for you. Because we are not seeking vast numbers, we're seeking quality. We also have the OMS YouTube. There's probably about 50 hours of webinars on there. The older ones don't have as good audio. It's before I had a Blue Yeti. They were filmed in a library at the Austin History Center, so there's some echo. But there's really good information on them. So if you're interested in this stuff, there's a fire hose to drink from of Martinist education. And these were spurred because someone in Austin was giving a lecture on Martinism, and he talked for an hour, and he only talked about Martinism for about 5 minutes. And it was all wrong. So we created this to give the education, give the public quality research education that was unbiased. We also have our Facebook page. Make sure to check out the pinned post. That is also a link to our mega with our public documents and application and pre-associate operation. And if you're really serious, join the Martinism Aspirates to OMS private Facebook group. You have to answer the questions to get in. And it's meant to be a safe haven so that those people going through the pre-associate operation can ask questions. Hey, where'd you get your sensor? Hey, what does this prayer mean? Hey, I just lit myself on fire. What do I do? It happens. You're going to do the Eloquent, you're going to burn your robes. It's going to happen. It's kind of like a rite of passage. And then there's those resources again, the website, the YouTube, the Facebook, the private group. And you can always reach out to me directly. to the official email for the order is grandmaster@martinism.net. Very happy to talk to sincere seekers. Know that over the next month, we are very, very busy. We are doing an inner order gathering this weekend. We just did a gathering last week, and we're doing an inner order gathering this weekend, and we're doing an international gathering next month. So it's gathering season. So if you don't hear back from us for a little bit, just sit patient. It's just because we're actually working. With that, I'm going to close the PowerPoint down. I'm going to turn on my camera. And if you guys have questions, let's go ahead and talk a little bit.
Yeah, Brother Paul, that was absolutely fantastic. Very fascinating. I know little about Martinism myself. I feel like I know a little more about, well, especially your particular order. But brothers, if you have any questions for Paul, please feel free to unmute yourself, ask questions. For those on Facebook, if you just want to type your questions into the comments, I'll be happy to read them for you.
Yeah, you can type, you can unmute, whatever you want to do. And I'm just seeing the comments now, the chat.
Hello.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Oh, hey, Paul. Hello, everybody. It's good to be here tonight. I am probably getting way ahead of myself with this question, but I kind of skipped ahead and been reading about Ellis Cohen and some of the seals of Solomon, the greater seals of Solomon, and some of the rites where they are talking to angels, angelic spirits. And these are very powerful spirits and beings, supernatural beings. By what authority do we as humans have to try to first of all, to talk to them or to get them to do anything? If you look in the Bible, an angel only did the will of God at the bequest of God, usually during a very significant event. So how do we even, where do we think to even begin to enter in that kind of dialogue with such beings?
Where do we get the audacity?
Yes, sir.
I will answer that for you, but I actually would kind of like to see if anyone in this group would like to unmute and give their opinion first. Anyone?
I would.
Go ahead.
I think that this is the central story to why Lucifer falls. Is the angels were tasked with supporting humans, and depending on whose story you like, Lucifer fell because he said, "I'm not doing that." Admit I'm adjusting the verbiage, of course, but I think that's where we get the agency for that.
Yeah, I'd like to just chirp in quickly. When you engage with the myth, you understand man's place in a different way than we've been taught. And once you've engaged with the myth and been trained on it, you look at the very question that was asked in a different manner. And that's just from personal experience.
I agree, definitely, Mark. Now, was that Christopher that answered first? I'm sorry, I kind of missed. Yeah. So when you said that you think that has parts to do with the fall of Lucifer, just to clarify, were you saying that the fall was because the angels were not supporting man, or because man made that command? That wasn't clear to me.
My understanding of the story is that they were directed by God to support the new creations, and some number of angels said no because their job was to support God directly, and doing this middleman thing wasn't what they had signed up for.
And Pasqually will deal with what you're talking about there. with his idea of the first prevarication, the first error, the first sin, if you will. Not a big fan of that term, but the first prevarication, the first error, was that the spirits, the first spirits, failed. And they did just what you said, they rebelled. Now, man was emanated in Pasqually's myth after those first spirits, after the fall. He doesn't necessarily use the term Lucifer at that point, but man was emanated to bring those first fallen spirits back to the light, to reclaim the fallen, prevaricated spirits and order them to come back to creation, to the divine fullness. But then man himself fell, and he was tempted by the fallen spirits. We could say the serpent in Genesis, but we don't get that. We get a little more mythological in the Kohen. But he was tempted by the first fallen spirits, and he himself, man, Adam Kadmon, fell into error and blindness and was split into Adam and Eve, into Hava and Adam. And that's when duality was formed. That's when the material body of man was formed. That's when the material form of creation was formed. Just like the alchemists said, such as Thomas Vaughan in his Euphrates Waters of the East, that the universe and the elements are a chain that man drags behind him in the fall. So the import in the Kohen is that matter was formed because man failed. Now, I don't know if we've answered Timothy's question, but does anyone else have anything they want to say about Timothy's question of how do we have the audacity or the right to call upon angels and perhaps command them?
Yeah.
Anyone else?
Am I coming across?
Yep, you're not very loud, but we can hear you.
Okay. Yeah. So would the answer be due to the fact that man's original state and his original command was to be at this elevation, and then due to the fall, once we remember and try to work back towards it, we have to do it this way versus when it was originally given to us. So it's not an audacity that we are doing it, it's an audacity that we're not doing it and we've forgotten it, and we have to regain that.
Very great way to end that response. Yes, by virtue of being a man, freeborn, blah, 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 by virtue of being a human, created of the original fire, created as the emissary of deity, which, as you said, because of the mythological fall, things are harder now. You might have to go through intermediaries to get there. You might have to earn your way back to it. But it is by virtue of what Martinism would call the first estate, the original clothing, the first splendor, the original nature of man. It is by virtue of that divine spark within you, as the Gnostics would say, or the what does the Kabbalist call the spark? I can't remember off the top of my head right now. Because of that spark of divinity, you still can reclaim that position. That's what I would say, and that's exactly what I would say, Brother Timothy Jerome.
Yeah, Paul, that brings up something interesting, and I've actually, this topic has come up over the last couple of weeks many, many times with brothers. But when we talk about the concept of as above, so below, it's more than just a spark of divinity. Every piece of matter, every atom, electron, proton, neutron, quark, neutrino, everything that makes us who we are emanations of the Creator. And in most major religions, in one way or another, they say that we are the emanations of God. We are God. Christ said that if you look for the kingdom of heaven in the sky, you'll only find the birds. If you look for the kingdom of heaven under the sea, you'll only find the fish. For the kingdom of heaven is within you. So when we say, what right do we have, or the audacity to think that we can speak to angels or speak directly to God? We do have that right. It's a birthright that we have as being emanations of the true God.
Mm-hmm. Most definitely. Very well put. As Christ says in the Gospel of Thomas, lift a rock and I am there, cleave a tree and I am there. the Martinist tradition is less, there is a lot of intellectual stuff. You have to learn a new symbol set, a new language, new number symbolism in order to understand the myth, right? But once you learn those building blocks, it's not an intellectual path. The first degree might be intellectual because you're learning a new language, just like when you study Kabbalah. Kabbalah is not an intellectual art. It just seems intellectual because you don't know the language yet. Once you know the language, it is emotional, it is intuitive, it is inspired. And I kind of got off there. You said remembering, that we have to remember. Ultimately, the Martinist tradition is about the path of remembering and everything it means. You can also say the etymology of remember, bringing together the separated parts of Osiris. It is about revealing what is already there within every spark.
So Brother Joe Martinez has a question over on Facebook. He wants to know what differentiates the OMS from the other Martinist orders.
Good question. I think I showed a bit of that in at least our curriculum. This talk was less about OMS, more about the three branches of the Cohen, CBCS, Void Cardiac, and then a little brief about like our curriculum and how we do things a little different. The thing that makes us different, number one, is integrity. Is that we are a non-political order. We are here not for profit of any way. We are here just to spread the light. Now, the real thing that makes it different for Martinists, the reason why other Martinists, why other Grand Masters, Roquois, SIIs, free initiators will join us is because they've been Martinists for 20 years and they haven't found what they were looking for. And we initiated a Roquois last weekend. We initiated 2 bishops last weekend. And I can say that they went through it and they're like, this is exactly what I've always been looking for. One of them during the Gnostic ordination said, this is the true Rosicrucian church I was looking for. And I hate saying true because we're not trying to badmouth or put down any other order. All Martinist orders have valid lineages. All of them have value. But we seek to bring together the entire tradition. If you're going through TMO, you're only going to go through a very simple Void Cardiac, a very simple Saint Martin path. If you are in MOUP, you'll go through a little more of a magical practice because Chicken Tabby did a lot of great work putting that in there. And we were members of MOUP years ago. This is being recorded, so I'm not going to say too much on that more about those relationships. But, and they have the Ambulon Cohen too in the inner order. If you go through OMCC, Ordre Martiniste Chevalier du Christ, they have a very solid inner order Cohen, but it's still Ambulon based. Most of those orders have a form of CBCS too, but it's only available to the highest degrees. And they're all essentially working the Ambulon revisions. What made us unique, and this wasn't on purpose, it was just like geeking out and wanting to study everything. We translate all of it, we put it all together, we practice it all, and we have decades of experience working magical orders. Before I was a leader of this group, I was a Grand Council member of a Progressive Golden Dawn order. And that taught us a lot about ceremonial magic. So we're a very magical Martinist order. As some people have said, most Martinist orders are speculative. OMS is a operative Martinist order. Not sure if that answered your question fully, but that is a start to the answer, perhaps.
It was a great response. Do any of the brothers have any questions for Brother Paul?
Don't be shy. We can always edit out the Q&A too.
I'll stop recording before we get to the juicy stuff. Don't worry. All right. Well, Paul, thank you so much for joining us tonight and being our guest for the North Carolina Masonic Research Society. I think we all learned something more about the Martinist order and Elu Cohen, and really, just these other Western esoteric mystery traditions or mystic traditions are so important, and I really love learning about that. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you so much, Brother Parker, for inviting me on, and to the Refracted Light team, Joe Martinez, Tim Dahlman, I think Jeremy Chevrier, et cetera, for bringing me back. This is what I love to talk about, man. Like, it's something that, you should live, breathe, sleep. Or at least it's the only path I can do is to live, breathe, and sleep this. Like, you're going to do it all the way or not all the way. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Hey, thank you.